Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Wednesday, July the 20th, 2022. First topic, Moratorium Now. And by moratorium, I mean immigration moratorium. I think we've reached an inflection point across the Western world, whereby we either move towards a moratorium model or everything that we understand as Western civilization will be swept away. Here is an essay on Spiked Online by Hardeep Singh called Stop Calling Them Asian Grooming Gangs. This is just another way of obscuring the truth about the ethnicity of most of the perpetrators. Last week's landmark report into grooming gangs in Telford made for truly horrifying reading. It revealed that 1,000 mainly white girls had been subjected to horrific sexual abuse by groups of men of mainly Pakistani heritage since at least the 1980s. Tom Crowther, QC, who chaired the Telford inquiry, said that the overwhelming theme of the evidence had been the appalling suffering of generations of children caused by the utter cruelty of those who committed child sexual exploitation. He then went on to say that the failure of the authorities to intervene was in part driven by a nervousness that investigating concerns against Asian men in particular would inflame racial tensions. Asian men? This is an odd description of the perpetrators. Crowther pulled almost no punches in his summing up, but this was definitely one he did pull. The members of the grooming gangs were not simply Asian, by and large, they were Muslim men of Pakistani heritage. This was not a mere slip on Crowther's part. The report contains nearly 200 or so references to the so-called Asian members of grooming gangs, and subsequent media coverage of the report has generally repeated its characterization of the perpetrators as Asian. Asian is a deliberately vague and non-specific descriptor for men identified as being largely of Pakistani heritage. Referring to these perpetrators of organized child sex abuse as Asian is as absurd as referring to the German perpetrators of the Holocaust as European. It gives the impression that grooming gangs might have been full of men of Chinese, Korean, or Japanese heritage. It suggests that members of Britain's Sikh and Hindu communities might have been heavily involved too. The use of Asian to describe members of grooming gangs obscures the very specific ethnic dynamics at play in this form of abuse. While grooming gang victims have tended to be white British girls, the gangs have also sometimes targeted Sikh girls, as they did in Leicester. What's more, some of the white victims of grooming gangs have told me themselves that the sexual abuse had a racial and religious element. The perpetrators would refer to them as white slags and claim that white girls and non-Muslim girls are bad because they dress like slags. This is one of the reasons why the British elite, government, media, local authorities, police, are not particularly interested in this mass child rape because of class differences. These are lower class white girls. So to the elite, they're scum, and they deserve everything that happens to them. But back to our essay. Characterizing these wicked men only as Asian obscures one of the motives for their actions, that as far as they were concerned, those they were abusing were non-Muslim and therefore fair game. You can understand why there's a reluctance to talk about the ethnicity of most of the perpetrators. To describe them as Pakistani is to risk accusations of Islamophobia and racism. Indeed, we need only recall the experience of the Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion. In 2018, she wrote an op-ed for The Sun addressing the problem of British Pakistani men raping white girls in reference to the Rotherham grooming gang scandal. She was subsequently accused of being Islamophobic and was forced to quit the shadow cabinet. Given the treatment of Champion, you can see why many in the public eye opt, in the interest of self-preservation, to describe Pakistani grooming gang members of Asian, if indeed they talk about the issue at all. Well, you can see how bad the problem has gotten in England. What, going back to the 90s or even the 80s, you have widespread rape of children. Let's not talk about this. Let's not do anything about it because it might offend minorities. Of course, Enoch Powell, in his famous 1968 Birmingham speech, said it's as if we are heaping up our own funeral pyre. And that is exactly what has happened. A country that cannot protect its most vulnerable for fears of offending minorities is a country which is at risk of dissolution. And of course, the author of this piece, Hardeep Singh, is a Sikh. Singh is a Sikh name. All Sikhs must have Singh, which means lion, in their name. And he's saying, don't confuse us, the Sikhs, with the Pakistanis. Now, there's a tendency among white people, particularly white liberals and progressives, to lump all minorities, and by that I mean third world minorities, if you will, to lump them together. This is a serious error because they are very different. To a very large extent, they hate each other. So this third world immigration that we see throughout the West, it's not merely a question of white people being made into minorities. And it's not merely a question of, as I say, everything that we understand to be Western civilization being swept away. It's an invitation to the war of all against all. I could point to another example from Spiked, this one from Inaya Fularin Iman. So what if the lionesses are white? The ugly obsession with race is bad news for the beautiful game. The England women's football team stands accused of one of the worst sins of our time, of being insufficiently racially diverse. Following England's 8-0 victory against Norway last week, which secured the Lionesses' place in tonight's Euro 2022 quarterfinal, a BBC presenter bemoaned the team's lack of diversity. She complained that all the England players on the pitch were all white. Well, of course, Britain remains something like 85% white. But the planted axiom in this accusation is that non-white people are superior. If it was simply a question of you feeling patriotic or nationalistic even because your football players beat some other country's football players, then you would want the best players that you could put on the field. But no, not at all. Minorities are better than white people, so they must be overrepresented. The author continues, it is especially tragic to see this grim racial outlook take hold in football. It is patronizing and wrong to claim that fans and would-be players need to see people like them to appreciate the game and admire the players. You need only look at the men's game to see why this is nonsense. The England men's team has players from a wide range of ethnic backgrounds who are admired by people from all backgrounds. There are millions of white English fans who adore Raheem Sterling, just as there are millions of black fans who admire Harry Kane. Even as I write this, I loathe having to categorize the players and supporters by their skin color. That's what multiculturalism demands. It's not just today's racialism, it is immigration that has led to this. And she goes on to talk about last year's men's Euros final, when Black England players were subjected to racist online abuse after missing their penalties. This sparked a week-long moral panic about racism, but it later transpired that most of the abuse came from a tiny number of bot accounts or from foreign countries. Still, the initial claim there was widespread racist abuse lingers over the memory of that game. No, it's worse than that, because there's no question that the English manager chose two Black players to take those penalties, because Black players are better than white players. And the English should be ashamed for being white. Now, of course, both Black players missed their penalty shots and the other team won. And somehow, here's another reason for white Englanders to be ashamed of themselves and their country. And there is no escape from this. Happy is the land that is united. I could point out that there was already rather significant ethnic diversity in Great Britain well before Windrush in the late 1940s. Let's see, you had the English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. That's a lot of racial, ethnic diversity, but it is not enough. And such is the dynamic of immigration that it doesn't become a question of diversity, it becomes a question of when is Whitey going to be in the minority so that he can really get it in the neck for the sins of colonialism. Moratorium now. We have seen in almost every aspect of life, not just in sport, which is relatively minor, but in literature, science, art, that, civilization as we understand it is white and is therefore bad, and it must be torn down and it must be replaced. You say that 2 + 2 = 4? Well, that is white thinking. How do we know that other people believe that 2 + 2 = 4? How about learning? How about education? Well, the idea that education must be based on a bedrock, built on a bedrock of facts. No. That's a white way of learning. To BIPOC people, I suppose, particularly Black people, apparently is far more free-form, jazzy, intuitive than that, which of course has a lot to do with, say, test scores and university placements. But let's not talk about that. We don't need any more immigrants. Not in the United States, not in Britain, which is a very crowded island, not in Canada, which is a very big country, but almost everyone lives in a very narrow band of Canada near the US border. Vancouver and Toronto are already majority minority. That is to say, they are no longer Canadian citizens. Canada could get by, I would guess, with 5,000 or 10,000 new people a year. If we have desperate shortages in important fields. For the rest of it, we continue to bring in hundreds of thousands of so-called temporary workers to my country, many of whom never leave. And over 400,000 so-called permanent residents every year. What is the point of this? 2 points. To drive down wages so that the 1% and the 1/10 of the 1% become ever richer. And 2, to ensure that the Liberal Party stays in power forever. Now, certain people, certain fools like Jason Kenney and Pierre Poilievre believe that, oh no, since these immigrants are natural entrepreneurs, and of course much better than heritage Canadians, they're going to flock to Pierre Poilievre's message of free enterprise. No, they are not. Again, politicians like Jason Kenney, Stephen Harper, and Pierre Poilievre are heaping up their own funeral pyre, but they don't care because they've made the calculation that there is no way that they can succeed without being seen as more multicultural than thou. So we are down to 2 candidates for leader of the British Conservative Party and next Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Rishi Sunak, the billionaire paper citizen, and Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, a neocon moron. More on her shortly. This is from the conservativewoman.co.uk. The bookie's favorite to be next Tory leader and prime minister is the man most directly responsible for burdening the country with £500 million debt and having the distinction of being the most fiscally irresponsible chancellor of the exchequer in history. Few commentators have fully considered the implications of a Rishi Sunak premiership. What is the character behind the boyish smile? What motivates him? and what of his judgment, it certainly needs more scrutiny than his faced so far. Why were there no white males that had any chance of being elected Conservative Party leader? Because white people are bad, and men surplus to requirements. Rishi Sunak is a Hindu, and of course his billionaire wife is what they call a non-dom. That is to say, she is not she's not registered as living in Britain for tax reasons. So one might reasonably ask, where's the loyalty there? In any event, Neil McRae continues. Critics spotted that before he had been in post for a year, Sunak had revealed an alarming conceit and shameless tendency for self-promotion. So what are the probity of a man responsible for the highest levels of taxation in 70 years, so careless with public money that he let fraudsters feed on 47 billion pounds of COVID loan handouts, much of which unlikely to be reclaimed, a scandal over which any previous chancellor would surely have been forced to resign. Through all of this, and apparently oblivious to the financial catastrophe in his wake, Sunak has continued to glide across the political stage, remarkably free of the mud that has spattered his cabinet colleagues. Belatedly, his shiny image lost some of its luster when he faced criticism about clinging to his U.S. green card and his wealthy wife's non-domiciliary status, begging the question of where the loyalties of this exceedingly rich couple lay. Sunak carries a potential conflict of interest with his in-laws' family business connections lightly. His wife, Akshata, whom Sunak met as a fellow student at Stanford University, married in 2009, owns the major company Infosys, co-founded by her father, Narayan Murthy. Infosys provides IT services, business consultancy, and outsourcing. It invests heavily in lobbying governments, using teams of lawyers to find loopholes in immigration rules. And it is as close as this to the World Economic Forum. Yes, Infosys is a technology partner of the World Economic Forum, which described the company as a global leader in next-generation digital services and consulting. A key product is Finacle, a digital banking platform. Sunak is an enthusiast for central bank digital coupons and has been collaborating with the Bank of England to float the idea of Britcoin, shades of Pierre Poilievre, an innovation that would threaten all our personal freedoms. Such currency would give unprecedented power to the state and global banks. Infosys President Moshe Joshi, in an article for the WEF in August 2020, promoted CBDC as the future for all spending in society. He also warned that paper money can transmit the virus. Oh no. So social credit system, here we come. Other vistas need attention. Sunak is an avid promoter of skilled migration. He also launched a drive to turn the City of London into the first eco-financial center, whatever that might mean. Consider what is happening in the Netherlands now. Globalist leader Mark Rutte has angered farmers whose land he is reported to want to acquire for building to make way for migrants. Holland has a unique combination of high-density population and the most productive agricultural industry in the world. An arbitrary nitrogen threshold is being used to wreck farmers' livelihood. The real reason is suggested by a document of Flevoland province, which has bought farmland in the Noord-Despolder, where the government intends to build an asylum center. Geert Wilders, a leader of the Party for Freedom, exclaimed, "Here's the proof. It just says it all. The farmer has to go because they want to build a registration center for asylum seekers on his land. They're completely destroying the Netherlands. Our farmers out, the fortune seekers in. No wonder people are furious." Let Britain burn, but Rishi Sunak, he will be just fine. I'm sure his billions, his family's billions are well protected. But another example here of if we can just show that we're not racist, then everything will be all right. So a woman called Kemi Badenoch, someone very few people had heard of until a couple of weeks ago, became the champions of the, I don't know, true conservatives. Her name is Olukemi Olufunto Badenoch. That is her married name. Her given name, surname is Adegoke. And she was born in Wimbledon, the daughter of a couple of Nigerian origin. I find it difficult. I cannot grasp the concept that a woman such as this could be considered British and thus be a candidate for Prime Minister of Britain. But again, from what I read of this woman, she seems a very sensible woman in many, many ways. However, she is not British. And for the British, the Conservative Party to decide, well, we don't care whether someone's British or not. Look, she is a black woman and the daughter of immigrants. How many boxes are we ticking here? Aris Roussenos writes in Unheard, with Kemi Badenoch's elimination from the race, the Conservative Party lost its chance to win a future. After all, the simplest, least inspiring case to make for Kemi Badenoch was always that of urging the wavering Tory party to glance at her competition. It is difficult for even the most captive lobby creature to summon up much enthusiasm for any of the remaining candidates. The hustings so far have displayed to the nation a party almost entirely devoid of energy or fresh ideas, indeed of any justification for continued rule. Should the party lose the next election, historians will say its doom was foretold this week, because they didn't choose a Nigerian as their leader. And he does make a good point about Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss. What are we left with? Liz Truss's Thatcherite Tribute Act, stale a generation ago, has now veered discomfitingly into the realms of bodily possession. Her outreach a few years ago to a supposed British millennial cohort of Uber, this is a quote, Uber riding, Airbnb-ing, Deliveroo eating, freedom fighters, unquote, threatened even then to make late-stage capitalism finally collapse under the weight of its own cringe. Yes, I'll have more on Liz Truss shortly. But again, if we want to save what remains of Western civilization, we need to bring immigration levels down to zero, or as close to zero as possible. And time is running out. I do not want to live in Eric Kaufman's white shift world. Apart from the fact that, living in Brazil, the Brazil of the North, where, well, just how white are you? Or just how black are you? Or just how Chinese are you? With the endless calibration, status seeking on that basis, that's bad enough. But, no. You see, I'm light skinned, but I'm only 40% white. So don't lump me in with those others. The cringe will never stop, despite Eric Kaufman's white shift. Let's go to the chat. Go up to the top. Hello to Quachalango, Anrun, Brian Frakes, Dan, Dawn from Beyond, Pitsky. Jokin 666 says, I'm becoming Canadian by osmosis. Dan says, control the demolition on all fronts. Pitsky says it will be swept away. Quachalango says, KMG, I nominate Chogokin 666 to replace Chad Chadson. Sure. Why not? Who else do we have here? Oscar Toe. And Quinn Dowding. Yes, this is a new name. And thank you for joining us. Hello to Dawn Willis, who says, Uhuru. And let's scrolling down. KMG, the Soda Pop Kid. Yes, I'm feeling rather low energy today. I've been having problems with my eyes. It is not serious. I won't go into it, but I'm rather exhausted because of it. So I thought that some caffeine and sugar and caffeination, not caffeination, I'm not even going to try and say that. White English fans, boo! That's from British American. Quachalango points out not one white footballer in France ain't that something. I'm well aware of, I don't follow soccer or football, as they call it in Britain, because it is the most boring game in the world. Oh, but they love the British footballers, the African footballers. Do they? Do they really? Because these men lead lives which in no conceivable way could be considered British, except perhaps for their consumption of chicken tikka masala or KFC. Oh, and I don't know, beer from Tesco. Quachalango says KMG are the French the best reactionaries, and do they have the best national literature? They have a very good national literature, and they take culture seriously still, or they at least they pretend to. The French idea is that we're not even going to count minorities because they're all just French. Now, almost everyone in France knows that that's not true, and we're not even going to talk about the dozens of hundreds of cars which are torched every single day in France, and we know who's doing it. We're not going to talk about that because that does not bring about national unity. Ayn Rand says, even if they assimilate a meaningless word by now, I still don't want them here. That is indeed my position. It's all a question of numbers, as Powell said. When you have small numbers coming in, then assimilation is possible. When you have large numbers coming in, and you look around, and that person looks like me, and that person looks like me, and that person looks like me, and this shop, and this shop, and this shop, and this shop are all devoted to people like me, well, then you get this very strong foreign ethnic identity. Hello to Van Man. Quachalango says, white way of learning. Do Mateo's homework, including a brain teaser, own question, go out and play, and don't smoke weed in tender teenage years. 0 new immigrants is the number, says British American. Hello to Jim Smith. Popcasso 88 said, was in a local mall yesterday and 2 women's clothing stores are closed because they can't find any help. And I watched No Way Out last night, says Popcasso 88. It was okay, but I don't understand the appeal of Kevin Costner. I don't know. He's blandly handsome. Sean Young was in that movie, and I liked her a lot before she went, crazy. The ending rather spoils everything that's gone before, I suppose. Costner has been good in a handful of movies, says Anne Run. My favorite is Will Patton going over the top. You have no idea what men of power can do. And I kind of like the one with him and Clint Eastwood, says Oscar Toe. Were they both criminals in that? One of them was a criminal. I'm not sure if I saw that. I had no idea there was a chain called Laura Secord, says Max Vitrell. I'm assuming that's Secord, the Canadian heroine against Yanks. They sell chocolates, yes. Typically in every mall or in most malls, you will find a Laura Secord store. Don Willis says, in my city is the same. In fact, many fast food places suddenly close or open based on employees showing up. Just incredibly hard to believe that big business can't overcome. It's bad. In Eastern Germany, the locals would do something to asylum facilities a few years ago, says Ruslan Akhmatov. Yeah, Sean Young. Hollywood wrecks a lot of people. and certainly wrecked her. You can read about the infamous contretemps between her and James Woods. They were in a movie that was called The Boost, which was based on a novel by Ben Stein called Ludes. The movie's pretty good. But apparently there was a fling and it ended, and then dead animals started being delivered, that sort of thing. I don't really know who to believe in that dispute. No admittance for purebloods to Canada, says Max Vitriol. Well, and similarly, I cannot go to the United States. And if I went to some country where I was allowed in, I would have to quarantine for 2 weeks upon returning at my own expense, of course. Anran says that Sean Young was very cute in Stripes. Indeed, she was. And the other actress in that, PJ Souls, who, of course, was the star of Rock and Roll High School, just the cutest girl imaginable. I like that film a lot. It seemed to be significant. You know, when the film came out, it was a big success, and I don't think that it was likely to be considered a success. You know, let's see what year it came out. 1981. It's a really unashamedly patriotic film, and audiences seem to like that, notwithstanding the fact that these lunkheads almost incite World War III by invading Czechoslovakia. But they're hailed as heroes, and the armed forces get behind them. Did Sean Young go crazy? I thought she just became interesting, says David Deneau. She was campaigning for the role of Catwoman in a Batman film. Maybe it was one of Tim Burton's films, and she started like showing up like to talk shows dressed as Catwoman. That's not how you audition for films. Oscar Toe says, yes, Costner was a criminal and Eastwood was a cop after him in a perfect world. Sean Young was cast in Burton's Batman but fell off a horse, so she was replaced by Kim Basinger. She was very bitter about it, says Palcasso 88. I liked Tim Burton's Batman, the first one, quite a lot. Kim Basinger, she's certainly good looking. I don't see much of a spark there. KMG is always tiptoeing around my posts, LOL, says Ruslan Akhmatov. There is a reason for that. So, do you want to know why Joe Biden is in such trouble, political trouble? Let's get the scoop from Perry Bacon Jr., who is a columnist at the Washington Post. It's the media. Yep, it's the media. The media has just been so mean to Joe Biden. That same media who didn't, write during 2020, oh my God, Joe Biden cannot possibly become the Democratic nominee. I mean, he finished 5th in the New Hampshire primary. He should have been out then. Oh, there's a stitch up going on. It's been decided that Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. But, he was never all that bright. But now he seems to be, how can I put this gently, senile. Is that same media? Anyway, back to expert Perry Bacon Jr. The mainstream media has played a huge, unappreciated role in President Biden's declining support over the past year. Its flawed coverage model of politics and government is bad for more than just Biden. It results in a distorted national discourse that weakens our, wait for it, democracy. The media needs to find a different way to cover Washington. Did you write that piece when Donald Trump was president? Perry Bacon Jr.? Did you? One of the sharpest dips in Biden's approval rating, which has dropped from 55% in January 21 to less than 39% today, happened last August, when it declined almost 5 points in a single month. There wasn't a huge surge in gas prices, nor some big legislative failure What caused Biden's dip was the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, or rather, the media's 24/7 highly negative coverage of it. Oh, you mean the panicked bug out from Kabul? To be clear, bacon is nothing but fair. Biden deserved criticism. Yes. But for much of August, the homepages of major newspapers and cable news programs were dominated by Afghanistan coverage, as if the chaotic withdrawal was the only thing happening in the world. Do these people have any self-awareness at all? Oh, Ukraine. Anything else happening in the world? Anything else happening in America? I'll have something to say about Ukraine shortly. Biden's poll numbers plunge, closely tracking the media hysteria. Afghanistan was an important turning point in media coverage for two reasons. One, it provided journalists the big anti-Biden story that I think many of them were desperate to find. No, it's exactly the opposite. And it drove down Biden's popularity with the public, giving the media justification for even more coverage that cast the president as struggling. Oh, struggling. You want something that shows the president struggling? How about every single time he opens his mouth? Did you see what he had to say yesterday or today? Have you seen this clip? Where he starts talking about autumn in Delaware and having to turn your windshield wipers on because of oil, and then everybody in Delaware, like me, getting cancer. What? How long are they going to let Joe Biden? It's not just, Jim Kunstler said on Monday, he's not going to be let out, to do any foreign trips again. How long are they going to let him appear, speak in public, or even from the White House with a teleprompter? These, if you've ever been around really old people, particularly people who are losing it, they become obsessed with their childhoods. And we see that, Biden carrying on about corn pop years ago, and what the blonde hairs on his legs, and ugh. But now we're going to find out about, the jealousies between brothers. You're going to be talking about that. So people in Delaware turn on their windshield wipers in their cars so they won't get cancer? Is that how it works? I knew Delaware was a strange place, but I didn't think it was that strange. What do we have here? Oh, yes. This is from John Cooper on Twitter, who's with Heritage. Secretary of, just let me get his title exactly right. Yes, Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, tells a crowd of elites at the Aspen Security Forum, quote, "The border is secure, and we are working to make the border more secure." It's times like this that I suppose one becomes a little disappointed in God. Why was he not struck down by a lightning bolt immediately after saying that? CBP saw more than 207,000 apprehensions in June, 1.7 million total this fiscal year, and there's 3 months to go. And the Biden administration is flying illegal aliens all over the United States secretly in the middle of the night. And you can see the lines of people just walking over the border, miles that are blocks long, maybe a mile long, 2 miles long, but the border is secure. This is an elite that is not afraid of punishment or even being held to task. This is from Jared Jager at the Post Millennial. Upon returning home to Canada from a trip south of the border, an Ontario man received a notification from his ArriveCan app instructing him to quarantine despite not having tested positive, despite being quadruple vaccinated and showing no symptoms. As a result, the frequent border crosser is stuck. His attempts to remedy the problem snubbed by the government. According to the National Post, David Crouch of Ridgeway, Ontario, was waved through the border without any mention of potentially having to quarantine or take a test. The news came only when he got home and checked his phone. I checked my email, Crouch explained, and there's an email from ArriveCan saying, "You are quarantined. This is your second day of quarantine." A frequent traveler and Nexus card holder, Crouch was eager to go back down south to visit friends or shop. However, he didn't know what would happen if he tried to cross the border while his app claimed he shouldn't be in quarantine. "I'm sitting here saying I don't want to get a $5,000 fine," Crouch lamented. "I don't want to lose my Nexus card." He explained that the app was asking him to provide information regarding his quarantine and would not let him begin a new ArriveCan application until his time in isolation was up. He also expressed frustration over the inability to contact authorities and solve the problems. "It seems to be one way," Crouch said of the communications channels between Canadians and ArriveCan officials. "They can tell you things, they can send you things, but God forbid you ever tried to get a hold of anybody." Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino's press secretary, Audrey Shampoo, defended the app after learning of Crouch's case. She pointed out that while some travelers may have experienced some glitches, the vast majority of those who use it have no issues. She added that when things do go wrong, the goal of the government is to help and educate, not be punitive. This woman should be fired. That is not the response. The response is, "We are terribly sorry that this has happened, and we will do all we can to rectify your difficulty, Mr. Crouch, as soon as is humanly possible." That's the proper answer. So you want to know what you must do in order to make sure that your kiddies in school don't get the dreaded corona doom? Well, there's a Twitter thread, which explains, and it refers to something called ABROM. Children are people too. I had no idea. Thank you for that. Hashtag emancipated learning. Hashtag self-directed education. Definitely a good idea. Hashtag liberation. Hashtag abolish school. Hashtag fund communities. Hashtag unschooling. Hashtag trust kids. Hashtag youth rights. Sounds like a lunatic asylum. So this is in Austin, Texas. It's some sort of liberated child facility. And apparently they got it all sussed. Our 2021 to 22 academic year just ended yesterday. This was posted July the 9th. We just finished our third year without a single case of COVID-19 in the space. What, are they testing them every day? All of them? This means not a single person was exposed at school. Doubly impressive given the transmissibility of the current variants. How did we do it? First, we prioritized community care over white, upper middle class reactionary insecurity. Boo! We recognized early on that COVID was falling heaviest on BIPOC communities, the immunocompromised, those without access to quality healthcare, etc. All our decisions centered them. Second, we acknowledge that nothing we do impacts only those at ABROM. All facilitators, that is to say teachers, and young people, that is to say students, both teachers and students are put in scare quotes, go home to families, friends, and to other communities each day. If we were to spread COVID at ABROM, we'd spread it elsewhere too. Yes, that is how communicable diseases work. Third, there is no such thing as a harmless single case of COVID that someone with a healthy immune system can overcome. Apart from being an incorrect statement, that statement is insane. Each case has the potential to seed a super spreader event. Each case has the potential to host a mutation that can become a new variant. So we focused on two things: not bringing COVID into our education community and not spreading COVID if it did find its way into the community. But you've already said that it didn't. So were you lying then or lying now? To not bring it in, we started with going remote during periods of very high spread. This was easy in the spring of 2020 when all schools chose to do the same. It got much harder in 2021 and 2022 when society bought into the argument that kids and teachers should accept infection. Oh, so what are you going to eliminate influenza next? Are you going to eliminate the common cold? Also measles, chicken pox, mumps, whatever. We also had each family conduct a daily COVID screening. If someone showed up having not completed it, we did it with them in person before allowing them to enter the space / join the group. It worked. During every wave, we had some students or staff get infected outside of Abraham. But because of our practices, none brought it into the community, which would have then spread out beyond the community, but it was already beyond your community. To not spread it, if it snuck into the community, we acknowledge that COVID is airborne. We mandated masks whenever indoors, KF94, KN95, N95, or better. 0 indoor mask breaks, and folks had to go outside to eat. Outdoors, they had to wear masks when close to each other. And we went outdoors for the entirety of the 2020 to 2021 academic year in the Texas heat. This year, we had at least one cell of people outdoors pretty much each day, except when we went remote during Delta and Omicron. During very high levels of spread, everyone went outdoors. How many children at this institution have gone insane? I wonder if there's going to be any follow-up on that. You know, people die of influenza. A lot of people worldwide die of influenza every year. We don't go crazy when people get influenza. People, particularly vulnerable, immunocompromised, if you will, old people, they die of the common cold. Again, we don't go crazy when children get colds and, they're going to spread it to other people. Yes, that's how it works. That is how it works. Here's a story. I'm going to leave off COVID-19 just for a minute here. This is from the National File, Cullen Moore. Joe Biden's DOJ is requesting that Guy Reffitt, a January 6th protester who opted to stand trial rather than accept a plea deal, be sentenced to 15 years in prison. U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Nestler has asked that Reffitt's obstruction conviction be given domestic terrorism enhancements. The matter will be left up to the judge to decide at Reffitt's sentencing. He never entered the Capitol building. Reffitt spent more than a year in a D.C. prison before opting to become the first January 6th defendant to stand trial. Isn't there something about habeas corpus in the American Constitution? It only took a D.C. jury just hours to convict Reffitt on a number of charges, including 2 counts of civil disorder, 2 counts of obstruction, and 1 count of carrying a handgun on restricted grounds. Prosecutors tacked on the handgun charge after Reffitt had already been in prison for months, arguing that a holster he was carrying that day contained a handgun. I suppose they could have actually found the handgun, or maybe even produced pictures showing that there was a handgun in his holster. Presumably, if they had that information, they would speak about it, but they don't. Reffitt was arrested by the FBI after his son, then 18-year-old Jackson Reffitt, turned him in after seeing his picture online. Jackson Reffitt proudly defended his actions during a January 2021 interview with CNN, saying he followed his moral compass. He added that he would gladly do it again. To date, a GoFundMe for Jackson Reffitt's college fund has raised close to $200,000 after he was disowned by his mother. Jackson Reffitt also secretly recorded his father after he returned from the D.C. jail in January 2021. His videos ultimately landed his father in prison for more than a year while awaiting trial, and he now faces up to 15 years in federal prison. So, the son, Jackson Reffitt, is hereby awarded the Order of Pavel Morozov, first class. In a 58-page sentencing guideline, U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Nestler asked for Reffitt's obstruction conviction to be given domestic terrorism enhancements. Nestler argued that since Reffitt, who never entered the building, was present while the election was being certified, his intent was to overturn the results. Nestler claimed repeatedly that Refit played a central role in leading a mob that attacked the United States Capitol, despite the fact that he didn't attack the Capitol. Under the Biden administration, the United States is becoming closer and closer to a police state, and no honest person can claim that the Department of Justice is in any way a non-political, impartial organization. And this is from John Solomon at justthenews.com. In the final hours of the Trump presidency, the U.S. Justice Department raised privacy concerns to thwart the release of hundreds of pages of documents that Donald Trump had declassified to expose FBI abuses during the Russia collusion probe, and the agency then defied a subsequent order to release the materials after redactions were made according to interviews and documents. The previously untold story of how highly anticipated declassified material never became public is contained in a memo obtained by Just the News from the National Archives that was written by then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows just hours before Trump left office at noon, January 20th, 2021. Meadows' memo confirmed prior reporting by Just the News that Trump on January 19th declassified a binder of hundreds of pages of sensitive FBI documents that show how the Bureau used informants and FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign and misled both the federal court and Congress about flaws in the evidence they offered to get approval for the investigation. The declassified documents included transcripts of intercepts made by the FBI of Trump aides, a declassified copy of the final FISA warrant approved by the Intelligence Court, and the tasking orders and debriefings of the two main confidential human sources, Christopher Steele and Stephen Halper, the Bureau used to investigate whether Trump had colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election. In the end, multiple investigations found there was no such collusion, and the FBI violated rules and misled the FISA court in an effort to keep the probe going. You can see why the Democratic Party is so desperate to hold on to power, particularly now desperate that they won't be trounced in the midterm elections, because when you do this sort of thing to your enemies, even someone was in the vicinity of the Capitol building on January 6th, so he should spend 15 years in prison. When you start pulling that sort of stunt, when you just routinely violate orders regarding the Russiagate nonsense, you have to expect that your enemies are going to do the same to you. Trump's enemies have never bothered to hide the fact that they want him in prison. Whether it's on a state rap, whether it is a federal rap, it doesn't matter. Whether it's from New York City, doesn't matter. They want him in prison. And do they really think that Republicans are going to pass up a chance to send, people like Hillary Clinton to prison? They don't think this through. Back to Corona Doom. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. COVID infections and deaths in New Zealand have soared above those in neighboring Australia, despite New Zealand maintaining strict mask mandates and Australia dropping them almost entirely. Wow, it's almost like masks don't work. Surely not. The data is explained in a Daily Mail article entitled "The Astonishing Data That May Prove Masks Don't Work." Masks are mandatory everywhere in Singapore, and Kiwis are forced to wear them in all public indoor spaces. In comparison, Australia mostly abandoned mask mandates, and they are only still compulsory on public transport and in care homes and healthcare centers. However, both Singapore and New Zealand now have higher case numbers than Australia. Will Jones wrote, of course, this is only the latest example that shows masks do little or nothing to prevent the spread of airborne viruses and may make things worse. The UK government's own investigation found that the evidence for the efficacy of face masks stopping the spread of COVID-19 in schools is, quote, not conclusive, unquote. We previously reported on the comments of UK government SAGE advisor Dr. Colin Axon, who dismissed masks as so-called comfort blankets that do virtually nothing, noting that the COVID-19 virus particle is up to 5,000 times smaller than the holes in the mask. Axon said The small sizes are not easily understood, but an imperfect analogy would be to imagine marbles fired at builder scaffolding. Some might hit a pole and rebound, but obviously most will fly through. And let's see if there's anything new at Eugippius. And let's open it up. Yes, monkeypox. Of course, you got to be very careful about what you say about monkeypox. You know, one doesn't want to be, discriminatory or homophobic. Urgent monkeypox alert. Some New York City health officials now wondering whether they should be encouraging gay men to temporarily change their behavior. Meanwhile, other officials argue that the approach would stigmatize gay men and would backfire. Still no anal sex hiatus to crush the curve. This from the latest New York Times monkeypox update, which notes that the number of monkeypox cases reported to the New York City Health Department has tripled in the last week and confirms that nearly all of them are in men who have sex with men. Expert disagreement about whether gay men should be asked to cut back on anonymous orgies or whether they should bang on untroubled by these novel, I'm not going to repeat that phrase. This peaked when the health department issued an advisory last week suggesting that having sex while infected with monkeypox could be made safer if people avoided kissing and covered their sores. Several officials at the agency were outraged, saying the agency was giving misleading and even dangerous health advice, according to several epidemiologists within the department in a review of internal emails. The advice on safer sex was not medically sound, said Dr. Don Weiss, the director of surveillance for the department's Bureau of Communicable Disease, in an interview. He believes the department should advise those at risk of monkeypox to temporarily reduce their numbers of partners, saying, "We're not telling people what they have to do to be safe." Unlike the corona doom. Alas, the good Dr. Weiss is but one voice, and as such, he is no match for the towering idiocy of the public health establishment. Quote, the agency in a statement Monday argued against such an approach. For decades, the alphabet people community has had their sex lives dissected, prescribed, and proscribed in myriad ways, mostly by homosexual and cis people. The statement said the city's response to monkeypox is grounded in the science and history of how poorly abstinence-only guidance has historically performed, the statement said, with this disgraceful legacy in mind, unquote. Eugippius comments, I get that I've made this point about 4 times now, and I'm sorry to be monotonous, but it's such an outrage, I'm going to type it all over again. These very same public health assholes criminalized going outside and closed playgrounds and did everything in their power to dissect, prescribe not just the sex lives, but the entire social distance of millions and millions of people. But now the mere suggestion that promiscuous gay men knock their promiscuity down a few notches to reduce the prevalence of uncomfortable butt rashes in their own community is somehow beyond the pale. I still think we haven't properly internalized how extreme and crazy mass containment was. New York City could outright criminalize homosexual sex and remain well within the precedent established by lockdown insanity. What about not mere advice, but legislation which directly forbids and stigmatizes not only gay sex, but the everyday social interactions that are a crucial part of being human? Why is that totally fine if we can't even ask gay men to take elementary precautions? The chances that our longtime AIDS activist and homeless shelter administrator, that would be Charles King, also bitterly opposed lockdowns are roughly zero, I would say. We just got through an outbreak associated with bowling, and shutting down bowling, along with schools, offices, restaurants, and everything else, was the first thing we did. Buggery, though, is more important than all that stuff. Buggery is the most central right of the Western democratic liberal order. The GAE doesn't need your kids in school. The GAE doesn't need you to pay taxes. The GAE doesn't even need you to work. Somehow, though, the GAE does need buggery. Without buggery, the GAE will shrivel and die. Sure seems like that sometimes. And let's go to Alec Berenson's Substack. And first up, the German government admits hundreds of thousands of people have had severe side effects following mRNA shots. Hundreds of thousands. Wow. But I thought it was just a mere handful. This morning, the German Federal Ministry of Health posted a stunning tweet admitting that 1 out of every 5,000 COVID jabs cause serious side effects. This figure is likely a sharp underestimate, given the fact that side effect reporting systems for drugs and vaccines are largely voluntary. Nevertheless, it implies that almost 300,000 Americans and Europeans have suffered severe side effects after receiving mRNA shots from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. It is unclear whether the German side effect estimate applied to COVID vaccines from India and China, which use older technologies and are largely unused in wealthier countries apart from China. If you can't trust the Bundesgesundheitsministerium, who can you trust? Yes, indeed. Health authorities now acknowledge that the mRNA vaccines do not stop COVID infection or transmission and are likely to have no preventative value against the Omicron variant within months. Thus, the risk-benefit profile appears increasingly absurd, especially because Omicron is notably less dangerous than earlier COVID variants to everyone, vaccinated or not. These COVID jabs are not cancer drugs where patients and physicians will tolerate severe side effects. They are not even influenza jabs. At this point, they are even less effective and far more dangerous. The fact that the effectiveness of the mRNA shots is measured in weeks against Omicron is merely the last straw against them. Even if they worked long-term, regulators would likely have already pulled them from the market. Any other product that caused this much damage for an illness that is little more than a cold for most healthy people. At the least, regulators should have severely limited the use of the COVID shots by adding a black box warning of the risks and restricting use to elderly people and those with severe comorbidities. Finally, because these vaccines do not have any chance of producing population-level immunity, the risk and benefit should be evaluated individually rather than for large groups of people. In other words, they should only be available by physician prescription, not offered to anyone who wants them. Yeah, good luck having any of these people admit that. I suspect we'll be waiting an awfully long time. Let's go to the Daily Skeptic. Will Jones reports a study confirms Omicron infection provides strong natural immunity, and Imperial's Professor Altman is wrong to scare people by claiming otherwise. Noah Carl reports in a recent blog post, legendary biologist Nick Patterson fully endorses the Wuhan lab leak theory. Study of 27,000 vaccinated women finds 42% suffered heavy periods following vaccination. Yes, we were told that that was a myth as well. I guess it's all myth. It's all a conspiracy theory until it is actually, proven true by empirical evidence, which is how science is supposed to work. Isn't empirical evidence supposed to be critical to science? I don't mean scientism. I don't mean science in block capitals with an exclamation point at the end. From Steve Watson at Summit News. Biden Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has again suggested that high gas prices are a good thing because it forces people to accept a transition to the green energy agenda. During a congressional hearing, Buttigieg said that the more pain Americans experience from high gas prices, the more benefit there is for those who can access electric vehicles. Buttigieg said basically the same thing earlier in the week, that high prices are forcing people to buy electric vehicles. GOP Representative Thomas Massey responded, the average household uses 1,870 kilowatts per year for air conditioning. If that average household plugged in electric cars, it would take 4 times as much electricity to charge the average household's cars as the average household uses on air conditioning. Buttigieg, along with Biden's gaggle of energy and climate advisors, have repeatedly suggested that Americans simply buy EVs, which retail above $50,000. The same crowd all converged Tuesday to declare that there needs to be an acceleration of the green energy agenda, the infrastructure for which does not exist. Well, maybe they can just, meme it into existence. Isn't that how things work now? Maybe, it's like Peter Pan. Maybe if we can, if we just wish hard enough, we can bring Tinkerbell back to life. Come on, kids. Come on, wish. Wish for green energy. If you wish hard enough, anything is possible. This is a sad story from Summit News, again from Steve Watson. Another pro-abortion activist called to testify by Democrats in the House suggested Tuesday that it is better for minorities in America to be aborted than to be born, and that she owes her own life to an abortion. The House Energy and Commerce Oversight and Investigations Panel, why are they talking about abortion in the House Energy and Commerce Oversight Committee? Heard from Renee Bracey Sherman, the founder and executive director of abortion storytelling group, We Testify. As such, GOP representatives were faced with another childlike person up on the stand, speaking in a cringe-inducing passive-aggressive tone and clearly unable to control her emotions. Bracey Sherman had even used a Sharpie to scrawl the pronouns she, her on the nameplate provided to her by the House. She told the panel that when she was 19 years old and pregnant, she considered throwing herself down the stairs and drank an unsafe amount of alcohol in the hope of achieving a miscarriage, which she admits she counts as a successful abortion. This was when that is to say, abortion was legal in every state, but you still drank a dangerous amount of alcohol and threw yourself down the stairs. There are possible other consequences of throwing oneself down the stairs, up to and including paralysis and death. But this is something that a normal person would do. At one point, Bracey Sherman claimed that immigrant children once born are ripped from their families and caged, while trans children are turned into political fodder, and black and brown children live in fear of the police. She further claimed that all these issues are not separate from abortion and should be taken into account by women when considering whether to go ahead with their pregnancy. Bracey Sherman also claimed that she owes her life to an abortion because her mother had one before she was born, because she wasn't in a relationship that was right for her. Yeah, okay. Let's see. TikTok video. There's a Darwinism and abortion. Have you seen that TikTok video? I suppose it'll come up later. And in shocking news that really anyone who's paid attention to this subject knew about a long time ago. This is from John Ely, or either Ely rather, at the Daily Mail. Low serotonin levels do not cause depression, according to a major review. Today's landmark findings call into question society's ever-growing reliance on antidepressants like Prozac. Millions of patients take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors designed to boost levels of the feel-good chemical. University College London researchers argue, however, that there's no convincing evidence that depression is caused by an imbalance of the chemical. One academic involved in the study described the findings as eye-opening, and that everything I thought I knew has been flipped upside down. Lead author Professor Joanna Moncrief of psychiatrists said, the popularity of the chemical imbalance theory has coincided with a huge increase in the use of antidepressants. Thousands suffer from side effects of antidepressants, including severe withdrawal effects that can occur when people try to stop them, yet prescription rates continue to rise. We believe this situation has been driven partly by the false belief that depression is due to a chemical imbalance. It is high time to inform the public that this belief is not grounded in science, unquote. 1 in 6 of British adults and roughly 1 in 7 Americans take antidepressants, figures suggest. Yeah, okay. There is no evidence that brain chemistry has anything to do with what we call mental illness. There never has been. Never has been. You used to hear about schizophrenia all the time. It was all about brain chemistry imbalance. And I've said this before, but I'm going to repeat it because it's relevant. That 40 years ago or so, when you could hardly go through a day without hearing about brain chemistry imbalance, Thomas Zaz, a psychiatrist and thus also a medical doctor, he decided to round up all the latest textbooks on pathology because, obviously, if chemistry imbalance was causing schizophrenia, then you were going to, cut up those brains of dead people to check out their brain chemistry. That's not done. There's not a single reference to this in any pathology textbooks. And furthermore, what exactly constitutes depression? This is not a clear cut. It's not a clear cut subject, Also, depression, or what we call depression, often simply follows events in life, unfortunate events in life. Oh, you got fired from your job and your wife left you taking the kids. God forbid that you should be terribly unhappy and not particularly want to do anything. And this problem was supposed to have been solved by psychiatry, 60 years ago or more? The idea that aberrant behavior may result from life circumstances. But apparently, yes, the Royal College of Psychiatrists urged people with depression to continue taking their medication. Antidepressants will vary in effectiveness for different people, a spokesperson said, and the reasons for this are complex, which is why it's important that patient care is based on each individual's needs and reviewed regularly. Studies have shown for decades that antidepressants have no more efficacy in treating depression than St. John's wort or a placebo. But the drug companies make an awful lot of money off SSRIs and other antidepressants. And doctors have patients who they find troublesome. Oh, God, what is it now? The torture never stops. They're going to write you for a prescription. Take this because it'll, fix you. But I like this feel good. This phrase, feel good. Serotonin. It is commonplace, the cliche of SSRIs, that they make people feel bad. Unlike, say, benzos, like Valium and Librium, which make people feel good. But scientists and their genius, or the pharma companies, have come up with a product that not only, scrambles your brain, it also makes you feel bad. What an age we live in. And Slovenia legalizes gay marriage despite population voting against it 3 times. Why? Because a court said so. So, yeah, that's that. And this is called democracy. No, actually, that's the opposite of democracy, but, what Neville Chamberlain said, he's a very bad man, because on September the 27th, 1938, he said that Czechoslovakia is a faraway country of which we know little. Well, the fact is that he was exactly right. This is the site Czech Heritage says, after making the remark, Chamberlain resigned as UK Prime Minister. No, Chamberlain resigned 2 years after that, in 1940. It was Chamberlain that actually declared war against Germany in 1939. I suppose most people think that it was Winston Churchill. Chamberlain resigned as Prime Minister after Winston Churchill's disastrous invasion of Norway. You don't hear very much about that either. Churchill was, when he got his hands on actual military activity, it ended badly. We didn't care about Czechoslovakia then, and we don't care about the Ukraine now. I suppose that there are some people of Ukrainian descent, that is to say, you know, their ancestors came from Galicia 120 years ago or so, and then were cut off, after 1917, entirely cut off. And they pretend, that they bleed for the Ukraine. But it has no relevance to my country of Canada. It has no relevance to the United States. It has no relevance to Great Britain. But if Liz Truss, Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, becomes Prime Minister, you're going to see Boris Johnson will be like a little baby compared to her in her fist waving, and this will not stand. So Liz Truss is currently Foreign Secretary, which used to be a position for, smart people, but no longer. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. On February 10, 2022, Truss met with her Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in the context of tensions between Russia and the West over a buildup of Russian troops near the Russia-Ukraine border. Talks between the two foreign ministers were described as difficult. Lavrov described the discussion as turning out like the conversation of a mute and a deaf person. He dismissed demands to remove Russian troops from Russian territory as regrettable and asked Truss if she recognized Russia's sovereignty over the Voronezh and Rostov regions, two Russian provinces where Russian troops are deployed. Truss mistakenly thought Lavrov was referring to areas of the Ukraine and replied that the UK will never recognize Russian sovereignty over Voronezh and Rostov. Later that day, the Foreign Office prepared legislation to allow for more sanctions on Russian organizations and individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, the next Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Yes, the British people can freeze in the dark, but they will die joyfully, knowing that their new Prime Minister does a very good Margaret Thatcher impersonation. Margaret Thatcher without the, how shall I say, knowledge and intelligence. There's a piece from Naked Capitalism, Eve Smith. Notice how the amount of Western reporting on Ukraine has fallen off dramatically. That's because the war is going well for Russia and its allies. Russia is continuing its steady and systematic grind through Donbass. However, Russia has also picked up the pace of its shelling, has moved some of its best equipment into Ukraine, presumably pre-positioning, and just had the head of its Ministry of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, visit key commanders in Donbass. Not only did Shoigu state that Russia would put an end to the Ukrainian shelling of civilian targets in Donetsk, but also gave the necessary instructions for further buildup of the troops' actions in all operational directions. In concert, Russia has moved its most advanced armor to the front lines en masse. Part of this effort to stop the Ukrainian shelling of civilians is recent and large uptick in Russian ballistic military attacks. Russia, which has stopped the active use of its Trochka used to deploy the more advanced Iskanders, has pulled its Tochka use out of mothballs to respond, at least tripling its ballistic missile capacity. Dreisen says that Russia used to fire 3 to 4 Iskanders a daily, and in the past 2 to 4 days is now sending off 10 a day, plus the Iskanders. 10 Tochka use a day, plus the Iskanders. All right, America, you're sending these HIMARS. We're still going to beat you. We have 10 times as much stuff as you can possibly send to the Ukraine. What's going to happen to the HIMARS is they're going to get destroyed, just like the howitzers were destroyed. Russia also blew up a meeting between some senior Ukraine military officers and foreign weapons dealers, with total dead estimated in the hundreds. While many observers would contend that the arms merchants are not combatants and deliberately killing them amounts to a war crime, the Russian position is presumably otherwise, since they are taking credit for this kill. This action may also be a shot against CIA and NATO operations in Ukraine. It may also be to give the West a taste of what might happen if they are so reckless as to let Ukraine get some of the 300-kilometer range HIMARS missiles that Ukraine has been begging for. Yes, the Ukraine is going to continue to disappear from the news because it's simply too embarrassing. Matthew Lee and Noman Merchant report at Associated Press, Ukraine graft concerns resurface as Russia goes on. Ooh, that is not a good sign for Zelensky. Are you suggesting that the Ukraine is corrupt? How dare you? The Ukraine is whiter than white. I mean, no pun intended. It is a model to the entire world. Just ask a legendary novelist, Stephen King, who got called by some Russian pranksters and said that Stepan Bandera is a great man. They had warned Stephen King about his war crimes, including against Jews. And Stephen King said, and I'm paraphrasing, there's a tendency to try and knock down great men because, everybody makes mistakes. There's black spots on everyone's record. Again, perhaps it would be wise for people like Stephen King not to comment on things of which they know little or nothing. If you want to say, in a sentimental fashion, that, we should support plucky little Ukraine against, big bear Russia, that's one thing. But, yeah, don't get into Ukrainian history. Preston Pish tweeted, Thanos attends the World Economic Forum. And this is a reference to Jane Goodall. Quote, at Davos, all these environmental things we talk about wouldn't be a problem if there was the size of population that there was 500 years ago, unquote. Lily, that is to say, allylilybit.substack.com, commented, the world population 500 years ago was estimated between 420 and 540 million, 6.7 billion fewer people than today. As I keep telling you, they want a Malthusian die-off. My response, what do you expect from a woman who abandoned humanity and lived among chimpanzees for decades? Chimps are the nastier, soulless versions of people. What's her name? Diane Fossey? She was with the big apes there in Africa for a long time. She got pregnant twice, and guess what? She aborted both of her children because her own children are less important than a bunch of gorillas. And oh, yes, listen to how this pro-abortion activist TikToker talks about babies. This is from Libs of TikTok. She is clearly deranged, moving her head back and forth wildly. And what she's saying is that if a parasite insinuates itself in your womb, then you just get rid of it because that's Darwinism, baby. Survival of the fittest. Yeah, she actually said that. Darwinians don't like to talk about survival of the fittest anymore because it's an obvious tautology. They survived because they were fittest. Well, how do you know they were the fittest? Well, because they survived. Oh, is that simple? Is it? Of course, this woman is she is not going to reproduce. So she's, her line is falling out of the gene pool. And the lines of so many affluent white female liberals are disappearing from the gene pool. Charles Darwin might have had something interesting to say about that. He might have had something interesting to say about the dysgenics of affluent white female liberals. And remember, American hero Alexander Vindman. Remember him? And Trump released a transcript, or at least notes of conversation to a Ukraine official. And then Vindman said, yes, Trump said this. Can you imagine? He said this on the phone. Well, Trump had already released that. Vindman was born in the Ukraine, and he became a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. He has a piece in Foreign Affairs magazine called "Build Ukraine Back Better." Yeah. But it would be a conspiracy theory, to suggest that the use of this phrase "build back better" is in any way significant. That it doesn't represent advocacy of central control of all countries, of all economies, of world government. Moscow's current offensive in eastern Ukraine is almost over. The Russian military is struggling to replenish personnel, raise low morale among its troops, manage the degrading quality of its military equipment, and suppress Ukrainian resistance in captured territories. Lie, 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 lie. That's the sort of thing that we expect from Foreign Affairs magazine. Let's go back to the chat. Do we have something strange going on in the chat here? Hello to Art Mob. And hello to Leponius Maximus Meridius. Cantwell is peak Darwinian bro, says Leponius. Hello to Metal Mike. How did she get pregnant if she lived alone with gorillas? Sigourney Weaver played her in the movie. I'm quite fond of Sigourney Weaver, but I did not watch that movie because I have little interest in gorillas. And obviously, some woman who would abandon humanity to live with gorillas for a rather long, period of time is crazy, Hello to Peak Meth Head. Okay. All right. Don't know what's going on there. Oh, something about Christopher Cantwell? Oh, dear. Please stop. Stop bombing this. Hello to My Trail of Disgrace. Oh, no, please. No wignets, okay? Stay away, wignets. Oh. Do we have any? I'd like to drink an ice cold Coca-Cola right now, says Van Man. KMG, what did you think of David Irving? Did he go off the rails at some point? That's Metal Mike, if I didn't mention it before. David Irving did a lot of good work. When he sued that American writer, Deborah Lipstadt, this is catastrophically stupid. Catastrophically stupid. And he lost everything as a result. David Irving has been rather coy about his feelings about, Hitler and National Socialism. One of those people like the late Alan Clark who would say, oh, I wouldn't do that because Hitler wouldn't, that sort of thing. Just being ironic, of course. I suppose you could get away with that sort of thing in those days. Certainly not now. Christopher Hitchens praised David Irving's work. And Irving has admitted, now Irving very controversially made the point that there is not a single document connecting Hitler to the final solution, which is true. However, Irving admitted that since this all happened, on his watch, that he is ultimately responsible for it. And hello to Ultra Testosterone. Gogoosh. I don't know what that Okay. Okay. I'm sure Khomeini laughed heartily in private. Y'all are used to ridiculous American grinning for no reason. That's from Ruslan Akhmatov. My trail of disgrace has said Khomeini's son only observed him laughing on one occasion during an interview, actually the second attempt by Orna Falaci. Oh, I don't spend that much time worrying about Iran. Of course, I will remind everyone that the United States had a friend in Iran, the Shah, and then Jimmy Carter decided he was a big meanie and then he needed to be replaced. And that Khomeini fellow, I mean, he's really austere and he's a thinker. And, he's been exiled in Paris. So let's bring him back. Aren't you afraid of, the mullahs taking over? No, 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 no. Iran's a modern country. They wouldn't fall for that. Is the United States State Department, has it ever been right about anything? And I think I'm going to get back to it here. And I'm going to talk about, let's go here, whatever this is. Unfortunately, Twitter, when you save a Twitter IRL, it gives you no indication what it's about. Oh, yes. The Free Nations of Russia Forum is being held in Prague on July the 22nd. The forum's objectives are to slice Russia into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least 9 different countries, with Russia itself reduced to something called Muscovy, a little rump country. And so PNAC lives. The New American Century, when the neocons were riding high after 9/11, maybe even before that, they came up with a notorious map where the Central Asia is just slashed into pieces. That Pakistan is carved up, and Iran is carved up, and Afghanistan is carved up, and just creating all these countries because, Woodrow Wilson did it, and you see how well that turned out. K-Boss 3 said these people are crazy. Once again, a reminder that neoconservatism is a death cult. But they still retain this extraordinary influence over successive American governments. How much compromat do they have? And yes, okay. Again, you never know quite what you're going to get when you open up a saved Twitter IRL. Now, this is something that I've talked about before, and I hope more attention is paid to it because it is potentially the greatest scandal in America and the greatest scandal in the history of American institutions. This is from Frankie Stocks at the National File. A Michigan public school employee who staunchly advocated for alphabet people curricula to his district's school board has been arrested as part of a police sting operation targeting local pedophiles. 41-year-old Eric Roman, an employee at Mount Pleasant, Michigan's public school system, was arrested as part of an Isabella County Sheriff's Office sting operation that also saw 2 more alleged child predators put behind bars. According to local reports, Isabella County law enforcement was assisted in the sting by agents from the FBI and the Michigan State Police. Along with 2 other men, Roman, 41, of Mount Pleasant, was arrested in an undisclosed location. All 3 were arrested for using a computer to commit a crime and accosting a minor for immoral purposes. Police alleged that the 3 communicated over various social media apps with decoys posing as children. The 3 are accused of going to a location to have sex with a child where they were arrested. When school parents push back on the pro-alphabet people curricula being peddled to their kids, Roman delivered an impassioned plea to the local school board in favor of educating children on homosexuality, transgenderism, even taunting parents at one point during his talk. Roman, who boasted to the board and audience members that he is both vaccinated and a proud member of the alphabet people community, also donned a Black Lives Matter t-shirt during his school board address. And he said that children are hungry for knowledge on homosexuality and transgenderism, so that if they don't get it at school, they will learn on their own, presumably from people like Eric Roman. This is just an introduction. Just an introduction. The bigger picture, or a glance at the bigger picture from Libby Emmons at the Post Millennial. Over 180 educators in grades K to 12 have been arrested on charges relating to child sex crimes in 2022 alone. The charges faced by 4 principals, among others, range from actually raping children to child pornography. One teacher in June received a 50-year sentence for sexually assaulting a 7-year-old student and then conspiring to kill him. In total, there were 4 principals, 153 teachers, 12 teachers' aides, and 12 substitute teachers, Fox reports. In April, a Florida middle school teacher was found guilty of sexual battery of a child. A high school choir teacher was charged with 9 counts of criminal sexual assault of students. A Missouri teacher faced an investigation for an alleged sexual relationship with a student. A Seattle teacher was charged with sexually molesting a student. These are only a few of the 181 educators charged with crimes against students. The Post Millennial has covered many of these charges as they emerged during the first 6 months of 2022. And now Fox Digital analyzed news stories culled from local reports since January and found that the average is an arrest a day. While men were the majority of the arrests at 78%, women were also among those educators who were arrested on charges of sexually violating their students. 77% of the arrests were due to alleged crimes against students directly. In addition to alleged criminal actions, teachers have been found to take students to drag shows against parents' wishes. Others have bragged about wearing ladies' undergarments to schools. A 3rd grade teacher recently admitted to socially transitioning students. Keep in mind that the authorities are not particularly interested in this. These are just random cases that come to light. It's not as if there's any kind of purge going on against teachers who molest their students. And once again, I'm not attempting to minimize the horror of the Catholic Church's crimes against children. I will say that if there were any substantive investigation of both public and private schools in the United States with regard to child molestation, this would dwarf the Catholic Church scandal. Absolutely dwarf it. But of course, in many jurisdictions, including, well, I know my own in British Columbia and the province of Alberta and elsewhere in Canada, these gay-straight alliances are mandatory in schools. And they need to have a teacher advisor. And so these are grooming parlors. Oh, I feel funny about my sexuality. Well, that means you're gay and you should start having sex with men. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, you're the teacher. You're the expert. This is what we subject our children to. And we're still able to look at our own faces in the mirror. Wesley Yang has a Substack. Yes, things are really as bad as you've heard. A leftist school teacher struggles to say aloud the things he regularly witnesses that are so outlandish they sound made up by right-wing provocateurs. I spoke with the anon poster below, a public school teacher in a blue city in a blue state, and he is indeed the sort of committed left-wing partisan who uses terms like systems of oppression unironically, and who regards anti-woke polemicists as cynical hacks and grifters. He testifies, the summer program where I'm currently teaching enrolls about 70 students between the age of 6 and 12. Classes are technically open to any child in the district, but only a few parents actually sign their children up themselves. Instead, the vast majority of kids are registered for the program by a teacher who is concerned with their academic performance the previous year. Parents can choose to accept or reject the enrollment, but the acceptance rate is something like 90%. It's free, after all, and plenty of these parents are already looking for a safe place to send their children while they work during the day. Safe. This enroll first, ask questions later approach removes many of the obstacles that keep struggling students from engaging with other summer programs, many of which have complicated application processes and require children to meet certain academic standards. However, it means also that many families aren't particularly invested in the program itself. Early on, an administrator confessed that this sort of setup could lead to attendance issues, which I took to mean some kids showing up late or even skipping class once in a while. 9 of the 11 students in my grade level were absent the first day. The next day, it was 10. By the end of the week, I had one student consistently attending and a few who had been officially withdrawn by their parents, but there were still 8 children on my roster who were technically enrolled, while having never once shown up. At this point, I took a look at the wait list to see if there were any students I could bring in to replace them. The games and activities I'd planned needed more kids anyway, and I knew the wait list was where families who actually wanted their children to attend usually ended up. On my lunch break, I walked into the administrator's office and asked when I could expect the half dozen or so children on my grades wait list to be let in. Immediately, I was informed of something truly absurd. The district is not allowed to remove any student from the program on the basis of non-attendance. A child remains enrolled in my classes until a parent explicitly states they'd like them removed, even if they have never once actually shown up. Now, when I said the district is not allowed to do so, I don't mean they're forbidden by some state law or local ordinance. Rather, the district actively embraced this policy as part of their larger equity and racial justice overhaul, and even bragged about doing so in public-facing materials. Their explicit position is that requiring attendance for any district program unfairly victimizes children of color, as does factoring attendance to any student's grades during the regular school year. The administrator I spoke to seemed baffled that I would even ask. I'll let you know if any parents pull their kids out, he told me, but otherwise, your class is technically full. You'll recall at the beginning of this live stream, I said that we need an immigration moratorium, or everything that we understand as Western civilization will be destroyed. Well, we're pretty close to that right now. People are enrolled in a program, they don't show up, they can't be tossed out of the program, and students who actually want to attend replace them because they're probably black, and I can't say anymore. That's where we are already. The teacher continues, as an extra dose of insanity, we can't even request that the parents of a non-attending student remove their child from the program. Doing so, I was told, could make them feel disrespected, or dissed, as they like to say. I just added that myself. And communicate to them that their children are not welcome. We just have to wait and hope they make that decision on their own, risking the occasional hint on a daily absence call that most don't even pick up. Over the past week or so, some of the chronically absent have finally been unenrolled. But as the program reaches its halfway point, the number of students who have never once attended but remain on the roster is still larger than the number of students on the wait list. Today, as I write this, more than a dozen children whose families have actively sought out our help are still sitting at home, unable to attend full classrooms of 4 or 5 students who are themselves struggling without peers to work with. I wonder if the school district gets paid for these people who don't show up. I strongly suspect that is the case. To most people, this sort of policy is absolutely inexplicable. How could it possibly benefit racial justice or equity to keep classrooms half empty, excluding students who want to attend in deference to those who don't? Well, here's a possible reason that Black children are given priority for these programs. And that if the Black children decide that it's boring, they don't want to go, they've had enough of school already, and they are replaced perhaps by, poor white kids, this would look very bad for the school district. Because these poor white kids, they have no excuse. They should have chosen richer parents. They deserve everything that they are going to get in their lives. And the teacher concludes, they'll tell me I sound like one of those right-wing grifter types. What else can I do except sigh and tell them the grifters have a point? In my short career as an educator, I have had countless experiences like this, encounters with colleagues and administrators so surreal that even close friends chided me for exaggerating or playing into right-wing tropes when I repeat them. And there's a sense in which I don't blame them, because things really are that crazy out here. And yes, and he gives other examples, but you can find this at the Substack of Wesley Yang. A short note from Tucker Carlson. He's speaking in Iowa, suggesting that he's testing the waters for a presidential bid, talking about aesthetics and architecture. Quote, I don't think I've ever heard a politician mention beauty. Noble ideologies produce beautiful results. Poisonous ideologies produce ugliness, unquote. I wouldn't have used that particular word, ideology, but he is certainly correct. Viktor Orban in Hungary likes to talk about beauty. Viktor Orban has arranged for the destruction of particularly hideous modern buildings in Budapest and their replacement by fine new buildings in the old style. So you see, there are things that can be done. Do you remember that movie Juno? Yeah. It stars someone called Elliot Page as a pregnant teen. You see, men can get pregnant because that movie Juno proves it. So there. This is a sad and also disgusting article by Mary Kate Carr at the AV Club. For most of Juno's 15-year history, it's been well regarded as a quirky indie film that made Elliot Page a star and launched screenwriter Diablo Cody, note, not her real name, her career. But in light of the recent overturn of Roe v. Wade, the film falls under a new light for its critical inciting incident, Juno being talked out of an abortion by an anti-choice classmate protesting at the clinic. Well, Cody has no regrets about writing the movie, she tells The Hollywood Reporter. I do think it's important that I continue to clarify my feelings about it, because the last thing I'd ever want is for someone to interpret the movie as anti-choice. That is a huge paranoia of mine. She stresses now, I am emphatically pro-choice and have been my entire life, and it's important to me to make that clear. But, you know, I can understand why people would misunderstand the movie. Looking back at it, I can see how it could be perceived as anti-choice, and that horrifies me, unquote. So what Diablo Cody is telling us now is that Juno made the wrong decision. She should have aborted her child. That true women are the women who abort their children. And so she's apologizing for a movie that came out in 15 years ago. Can you imagine that? Now, she says that she's pro-choice. Well, Juno could have decided to abort the child, but decided to keep it. But again, Diablo Cody is strongly suggesting that she made the wrong choice. And Diablo Cody hastens to inform us that I've had an abortion myself since I made that movie. Whew. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Diablo. I didn't think that you were one of those horrible, horrible, selfish women who actually, took their babies to term, or used surrogates or whatever. Let's go back to Tainter. I know you're waiting for it. This is from The Collapse of Complex Societies. At this point, we arrive at the first step toward understanding the difference between societies that slowly disintegrate and those that rapidly collapse. The Byzantine and Ottoman empires are classic examples of the former. Both gradually lost power and territory to competitors. There was in this process no collapse, no sudden loss of complexity, for each episode of weakness by these empires was simply met by expansion of their neighbors. Herein lies an important principle of collapse and the final installment in its definition. Collapse occurs and can only occur in a power vacuum. Collapse is possible only where there is no competitor strong enough to fill the political vacuum of disintegration. Where such a competitor does exist, there can be no collapse, for the competitor will expand territorially to administer the population left leaderless. Collapse is not the same thing as change of regime. Where peer politics interact, collapse will affect all quality if and when it occurs, provided that no outside competitor is powerful enough to absorb all. Here, then, is the reason why the Mayan and Mycenaean centers collapsed simultaneously. No mysterious invaders captured each of these polities in an improbable series of fairy tale victories. As the Mayan and Mycenaean petty states became respectively locked into competitive spirals, each had to make ever greater investments in military strength and organizational complexity. As the marginal return on these investments declined, no polity had the option to simply withdraw from the spiral, for this would have led to absorption by a neighbor. Collapse for such clusters of peer polities must be essentially simultaneous, as together they reach the point of economic exhaustion. Since in both cases no outside dominant power in the Mesoamerican highlands or the Eastern Mediterranean was both close enough and strong enough to take advantage of this exhaustion, collapse proceeded without external interference and lasted for centuries. Later Greek city-states, by contrast, were confronted with powerful neighbors who would take advantage of a political vacuum and so lacked the option of collapse. Here, too, is the final reason why, as raised in Chapter 5, the Eastern Roman Empire could not collapse as did that of the West. Disintegration of the Byzantine state would have simply resulted in the expansion of its peer, the Sasanian Empire, as throughout its history, Byzantine weakness always led to expansion of its rivals. There was no possibility in the Eastern Mediterranean for a drop to lower complexity commensurate to what happened in the power vacuum of Western Europe in the 5th century AD. The occurrence of declining marginal returns, then, need not always lead to collapse. It will do so only when there is a power vacuum. In other cases, it is more likely to be a source of political and military weakness, leading to slow disintegration and/or change of regime. Lewis's observations on the decline of the Ottoman Empire and McAdams' on replacement of the Sasanian by the Islamic regime in Persia both illustrate this process. Toynbee's account of the role of the Romano-Bulgarian War, 977 to 1019 AD, in the Byzantine loss at the Battle of Manzikert, 1071, shows clearly that Byzantine conquest of the Bulgars was achieved at very high cost for low return and weakened the Byzantine state. And I will have more from Tainter's Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And let's go to the chat. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. So what are we going to do here? Okay. There's one. And I'm just dealing with trolls here. Okay, there's another. How many are there? 2, 3? At least 2. And I'm scrolling down to see if there's a... okay, I think it's 2. Okay. We got a new sheriff here, bro, so you might want to chill or he will clear you out, says Quachalango. And let's go down to the bottom here. Paige claims she was pressured to maintain an unhealthy weight and dress in certain ways, but she was clearly healthier then. These pictures, I mean, on the covers of magazine, features and the like, showing off, you know, what a moody young man he is. She looks suicidal. She looks desperate and suicidal. Paige was never a beauty queen, never a pinup. Her appeal was that she was alternative at that time. Not particularly good looking, not sexually attractive, forced into some ideal. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Okay. Oscar Tosa's Tainter does still teach at Utah State, I hear. And what else do we have here? Okay, let's leave with a brief discussion of dreams, or a fact about dreams. I don't know. This is a binary division, I suppose you could say, because there's some people who find dreams to be fascinating, and others to find them the most boring subject there is. But this is fear in dreams that we're talking about here. And just let me bring up the tweet. And it is from Sean Ono Lennon, who asks, what's up with English speakers and teeth falling out dreams? I definitely get that one, but I get flying most of all. So this is a survey about the things that people are most afraid of in dreams by country. Canada, teeth falling out. The United States, teeth falling out. Mexico, ex-relationship. Lice is number one in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. In Costa Rica, it is the dead. In Honduras and Panama, it is snake. Oh, yeah. Rastafarian culture, testify. In Jamaica, it's baby. In Haiti, oh, this is horrifying too. People in dreams, people are most terrified of cars. Trinidad and Tobago, snake. St. Vincent and Grenadines, pregnancy. Dominican Republic, snake. In the Bahamas, the dove. Is that some sort of religious symbol? I mean, we know it's religious symbol in Christianity. Let's look at South America. Brazil, snake. Paraguay, snake. Uruguay, snake. Argentina, spiders. Bolivia, baby. Peru, rats. Ecuador, snake. Colombia and Venezuela, lice. Guinea and Guyana and Suriname, baby. Let's take a look at Africa. In Algeria, people dreams, worst thing, most nightmarish thing in nightmares, marriage. In Libya, cutting hair. In Egypt, snake. In Mali, the dead. Yeah, remind me to avoid Mali. In Nigeria, sex. In Niger, death. In Ethiopia, shoes. Presumably the loss of shoes. In Congo, the Congo, marriage. In South Africa, money. In Botswana, eating. In Namibia, squirrels. I've never heard of anyone afraid of squirrels before. And snake, the ever popular snake, tops the list in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Angola, and Kenya, and Uganda. In Togo, ex-relationship. Snake, again at the top at Burkina Faso, Senegal, and the Ivory Coast, Cameroon, and in Gabon, marriage. Madagascar, ex-relationship. Mozambique, snake. Rwanda, wedding. Tanzania, pregnancy. Let's take a look at Europe as to what are the most frightening things that appear in nightmares. Teeth falling out. Tops the list in Sweden, Norway. Let's see, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Poland, and what was that? Oh, yes, Slovakia and Spain, In France, the number one fear is ex-relationship. Vengeful. Are they expected to be vengeful? Snake makes its appearance in Europe as the number one fear. In Serbia, Macedonia, and Bulgaria. Also Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro. In go-ahead Slovenia, the number one fear in nightmares is money. In the tiny mountainous country of Andorra, it is being cheated on. In Armenia, the number one fear in nightmares is grapes. Come on, are they having us on? In Hungary, it is the dead. Well. And let's look at the Middle East. In Saudi Arabia, number one fear is marriage. Kuwait, pregnancy. But teeth falling out, the United Arab Emirates. Snake in Oman. Cutting hair in Jordan and in Palestine. In Israel, snake. Pregnancy in Lebanon. Snake in Turkey. Snake in Iran. Snake in Afghanistan. Snake in Kazakhstan. I think Oman, also snake. I think we can divide the world. There's a binary division between that half of the world which is terrified of snakes and the half of the world that isn't. Let's look at East Asia. Snake is at the top at Mongolia, India, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, Brunei, Taiwan. Oh, this is a new one. In South Korea, the greatest nightmare fear is falling into water. The rainbow is the number one nightmare fear in Bhutan. A very interesting society there, as one might expect. Teeth falling out is the number one fear in New Zealand and Australia. Indonesia, pregnancy. In Fiji, it is the peacock. Okay. I don't quite get that one. So I haven't listed all of the countries, but quite a few. Oh, no, wait. Going a little further north here. In Nepal, Laos, Vietnam, Mongolia, snake, 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 snake. And in Japan, it is ex-relationship. Here's a new one to the list. In Cambodia, the number one nightmare fear is the crocodile. So let's have a final look at the chat. Here we go. What? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. There we go. Okay. Any thoughts on dreams here? Visionary Companion says, this reminds me of Robert Benchley's humorous essay about phobias, which included octophobia, the fear of the figure eight. Oscar Toe says, spiders really looking bad in this. Seek bad, predator birds good. Okay, says Quachalango. Alrighty. Ex-relationship. The peacock and the snake. Chogo wins the internet tonight, says Palcasso88. Yeah, I've lost several of my teeth, as you all know, because you can see me, you know. But I'm aware of this fear, of the nightmare fear of losing teeth, because I had that dream for decades and decades. And, before I lost my teeth, that I would, be dreaming, and I'd look in the mirror and I'd open my mouth and see all my teeth were gone. And then I would be horrified. And then I would think, oh, great. That's just what I need now. There's a really good literary representation of this horror in Martin Amis's second novel, which is called Dead Babies. It's a very funny book. It's also nightmarish, and you have been warned. Okay, you have been warned. The Dead Babies was such a incendiary title that the paperback publisher refused to bring it out under that name. It was adapted into a film starring Paul Bettany and Olivia Williams in 2000. Very fond of Olivia Williams. I found her a very attractive woman and a fine actress. And yes, horrible teeth nightmare stuff in Martin Amis's Dead Babies. And you could say Chekhov's teeth make an appearance. I can't say I had the teeth dream in a long time. I think I mentioned last week or the week before. I may have mentioned the Zaz movie. I know I did on Twitter. Top Secret, where I nominated this as the best gag in the history of cinema. It's a very strange movie because it starts off as an anti-communist Cold War movie, and then about halfway through, it morphs into a World War II French resistance movie. Anyway, Val Kilmer, this is his first movie, and he sings, he dances, he acts, he's great. He's captured by the bad guys, and they are torturing him, and he passes out in pain. While in his delirium, he has that dream where he's frantic and he's running a deserted hallway, and he's looking at all of the doors. This is a school. And he comes up to this other boy, this other student, and says, "Where's the chemistry exam?" And the other student, in the pitch perfect nightmare speech, flat delivery, says, "Don't you know? The exams are over. Haven't you been to school?" And then he's frantic. "Oh my God, I missed the chemistry exam. I'm going to have to repeat the grade." And then he comes out of his reverie, and he's being not punched this time, but whipped. And he's got his arms up, and they're chained to the ceiling. And he gives a sigh of relief. I didn't miss the final chemistry exam. I have that dream about once every week or fortnight, that it's the last day of school in grade 12 at Vancouver Technical High School. And it was just an ordinary high school. I wasn't sent there for any special reason. And that I have failed an exam, and I'm going to I've got my head in my hands, and I'm wandering down the hall saying, oh my God, I'm going to have to spend another year in this hellhole. They say that people who have this dream typically did not do badly in school. And that was my experience. Oscar Toe says Edward Furlong had to get all new teeth because of meth, and they look too perfect. If I was in the position of simply getting all my teeth replaced, they'd probably say, well, you don't want them too white, do you? And I say, no, I want them as white as can be, because I smoke cigarettes and I drink a lot of tea, and they are going to start to yellow. But I want to start at 100% white. Thank you for your kind words, Don Willis. And hello to G's He's Style. So I think that's it. I hope we have a better hold of the chat tomorrow. We can only hope. I'll do what I can. And if Chogo takes up the challenge, perhaps that will staunch the invasion. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.